you must be afraid. You must be very afraid because there's an enemy here in your midst. So be careful. On a bit more serious note, on the issue of enemy, the fact is, to use enemy in your language, I don't think it's nice. The fact is that what you do with enemies, you destroy them. And therefore, I don't think it's acceptable to use words like enemy in speeches. Not in a democratic South Africa, especially not if the enemies that you refer to work within the boundaries of the Constitution of South Africa. So I don't think using the word enemy has a place in a democratic South Africa. But I'm in the first place tempted today then to react as an enemy. But I've decided not to do that. I decided to try to use this opportunity to go beyond the whole idea of if you differ from me, you are an enemy. I will rather choose today to go the route, a bit of a change in the old children rhyme. You know me, I know you, then we are a happy family. So that's why I thought I would rather take that specific line, especially at an audience like this. When I got the specific topics, in the beginning I thought I got both topics, equality, in the first place, proposals to phase out overrepresentation and case for quotas or targets, those two topics. So I prepared a speech on both the topics. But in the light of time, I want to propose that you get my full speech there. It's there on that table there. And I've made a short summary of that speech here within this. But in the light of time, I'm not going to do even the summary here. But I want to ask you, please, on both the topics, I react then thus on Jimmy's topics. I will now come to Jimmy in that specific speech. So, after I've noticed that Mr. Manji is here today, and I know of our specific history, a history of a lot of debates that we took part in together on several occasions, the CACNet debate, etc. I've decided not to stick with that written speech of mine. I've decided to talk from my heart. So that is what I want to do today here at this specific meeting, talking a bit from my heart, so that you can also hear a bit of more in-depth discussion of how I feel, how I see. The fact is that Jimmy is not Jimmy anymore. Jimmy changed his name. So I've realized that my responsibility now is to try to pronounce his name. And I want to do it correctly. My problem is, if it happens for some reason that I don't do it correctly, I'm just afraid that I will end up in Parliament with a president that rectifies my pronunciation of a specific word. So I learned to pronounce his name. It is Mzwane. Let me try again. Mzwane. Mzwane. So even if you are discussing very serious matters today and someone stands up and say, point of order, I will say, Mzwane. The reason why I want to talk from my heart is because of two Twitter incidents. The first was the time Mr. Manji responded to one of my tweets in Afrikaans. I really appreciate that. in spite of our differences, he showed respect. On Twitter, he then challenged me to respond in Xhosa the next time. The second incident had been an invitation from Mzwanele on Twitter inviting me for coffee at Vilakazi Street. So, I am happy now, today here, formally, we did speak informally, to respond to this specific invitation of his to drink coffee at Vilakazi Street. And I've decided to show my respect to Mzwanele by doing this response then in Xhosa. But I will do it without the clicks. So my response to his invitation, Nigantanda ukusela nawa ikofi Vilakazi Street. God wake, na vekuza kufunaka uzi kuchanam iziglo sakusase voortrekker monument. And those of you that's Xhosa is not as good as mine, I will repeat that in English. I will be happy to accept your invitation for coffee at Vilakazi Street on the condition that you join me for breakfast at the Voortrekker Monument. It is necessary for us to understand each other's heart. We have different narratives which influence us, and we must share it with each other. And that is why an opportunity like that will be so great. Maybe one of the biggest problems in South Africa is that we don't really know each other. We judge someone else from our own narrative. I experienced that from this morning. And that leads to a total misunderstanding between us. South Africa is a country with a variety of people. This variety makes our country so unique. When we get to know each other better, your country becomes richer and your people becomes richer. I know of Jimmy Manji, but do I know Mzwanele Manzi? You know of Dirk Hermann, but do you know my heart? And today I give you a piece of my heart. And my heart is an African heart. It is therefore also your heart. Africans and Afrikaners have one important thing in common. Africa is in our name. According to my narrative, I'm a child of Africa. I don't see myself as a colonialist of a special type. To me, that's an insult. Not just for me, but also for my ancestors who fought and died in a war against colonialism. A colonialist occupied, exploit and go back to his country of origin with the wealth of the colony. My first ancestor's name was Hans, and he arrived in South Africa in 1657. He was a member of the first group of Vryburgers or freed citizens, and he turned his face to Africa and his back on Europe. Since then, we have been in a battle for African land. My language has been named after Africa, Afrikaans. We named ourselves after Africa, Afrikaners. My people had been part of the Voortrekkers and we moved into Africa. Simultaneously with our journey, there had been large population shifts, much larger than our relocation, large-scale wars and ethnic incorporations, much more serious than wars we had been involved in. Our journey had been to Natal, where my family members became victims of the Blaukrans and Vienna murders. But all these journeys and wars of the different groups took place with their faces to Africa. We settled in the north. My great-grandfather, Martinus Nicolaas, fought against Great Britain in the First Boer War. He participated in the Battle of Mayuba and contributed directly to the victory of an African tribe over a colonial power. But the British colonialists threatened our pursuit of freedom again. Martinus Nicolaas participated in the Second Boer War, also known as the Anglo-Boer War, or in nowadays history books, the South African War. The English wanted our gold and our wealth for the sake of the bigger empire. We had to go to war, but not a war to exploit, but a war for a place in Africa. Martinus Nicolaas' farm was burned down. He was sent to Ceylon into exile. His wife and son died in concentration camps. His daughter, my grandmother, survived the concentration camp. Martinus Nicolaas rebuilt the farm and got involved in several projects to stand up after the war. The projects were not government projects, but on the contrary. The English, like typical colonialists, wanted to incorporate us into the majority, and they wanted to destroy the Afrikaners and all that was Afrikaans. After the war, we stood up in spite of the government. Martinus Nicolaas supported the rebellion in 1914, and he stood up against the empire's efforts to expand its colonial interests in the former Dutch West Africa. The price our people had to pay for this was high. Some were killed during the rebellion. Others received jail sentences, and others had to pay exorbitant fines. The stand-up actions after the rebellion was called Help Mekaar, or Help Each Other, and came from the community in spite of government. Mother tongue education was central to the standing up. Mother tongue education, in my story, is an instrument of empowerment. In the 1930 depression impacted heavily on our family and our people, and we became part of the poverty and unemployment statistics. My father came from such a poor family. His grandfather, Martinus Nicolaas, told them about the war and the death of his grandmother. His mother never told them about, as they called it, the death camps. My father is also a child of apartheid. He's not a criminal. He has a very kind heart. My parents have wonderful relationships with black South Africans, and they reach out to poor people almost in an abnormal way, to black and white, but more to black people. I think it is his own history of poverty that drives him to it. I asked my father how it happened that a discriminating government control system like apartheid could be supported by so many good people. He wrote me a 14-page letter in which he explained, not defended, the concept of apartheid. An underlying theme was what I now call the never again syndrome. The heartache caused by the death camps was still raw, and the never again system was implemented. I do not want to present apartheid simply as a product of never again after the war, but it had, on my father anyway, a great influence. Apartheid was a South African paradox. In reaction to the sadness of colonization, the logic of colonization was continued through apartheid, a central idea and system that was enforced from the top. The price Afrikaners paid for apartheid is that they lost their sense of community in exchange for obedience to a government system. Ironically, Afrikaners lost their freedom as community through apartheid. Afrikaners became very effective government officials, but the English, who were mostly outside the system, became entrepreneurial and started overpowering the economy. The apartheid system was unsustainable, discriminating, and led to humiliation. I will do injustice to such a hurtful system if I pretend to understand. All I can do is to try and imagine what it would have been like if my mother had not been allowed to use a specific toilet or sit on a specific bench. Just that piece of emotion is enough to realize that the system could not survive the moral test of time. That brings me back to today. I hear never again. I hear about a system that must free and rectify. I hear about more state and less community. I see people who want to break from slavery of one system by becoming slaves of another system. I participate this morning in a discussion on how young people can be taught to become dependent on the system. The previous time that I participated in a BMF forum, Enoch Konongwana said that not one of the black elite in the audience would have been there if it had not been for BEE. What an insult. But the audience applauded. They believe their success is dependent on the system. There was a time when Afrikaners also applauded the system, but they did not realize that they had become slaves of the system. This brings me to the next paradox. I teach my girls, and they hear it all over. The system is not going to help you. You must work hard and learn. White children, you are on your own. Ironically, they are different from the white apartheid children. They are free from the system. They experience discrimination by a system, but they are not enslaved by the system. Freedom from a system creates entrepreneurship. My children will be like corkscrews that are being held underwater, but eventually they will pop up. The result is that the government officials are going to ask, where do all these white people now come from? There must still be discrimination in the system. Let's implement more systems, bigger fines and more inspectors. The subheading will be, let's make our people more dependent on the system, because never, never again. Today, I talk about paradoxes. To me, it seems that the ANC continues with the wrongful thinking of the apartheid generation. In an effort to correct the previous system, the logic of the system is continued. A large central idea, a central system, and a state, or then an empire, where everybody must join in. That logic will not rectify and will not free people. It will not succeed in what is supposed to happen and what it tries to rectify. And that figures we've seen today. Well, if that's true, then it makes the ANC colonialists of a special type. With all due respect, I see more Jimmy than Mzwanele in the BEE system. I see more Jimmy than Mzwanele if roads fall, but the colonial language is still the only medium of instruction. Mzwanele, this is my narrative. It's definitely not a complete narrative, but it is also not wrong. Similarly, your narrative is also not complete and also not wrong. It's wrong when one of us offers one's narrative as complete and expect the other to accept that. Let's start talking in South Africa again, and let's keep on talking. If you don't share my narrative, if I don't share my narrative with you, you will judge my actions simply from your narrative's perspective. We cannot know each other if we don't know each other's stories. In the light of that, I look forward to our breakfast at the Voortrekker Monument. I promise you a koeksister. I promise you one of the new Afrikaans roses, because I know you like roses, and a packet of biltong for our discussion on the Rugby World Cup on our way to Willowcassie Street. All our stories make up a beautiful South African story. United in our diversity, we are Africa. Thank you.